when the Bitcoin story clicked for me, never mind working in Bitcoin, because I didn't have a path to a Bitcoin job or per se. It was more that like I literally was lacing up my Timberlands, and I would go and I would around all my former college friends, and they'd say, "Man, what happened? How, I thought you were in the this school," and I was like, "I was, but now I'm doing electrical work for $16 an hour." They were like, "What are you doing?" And for me, it was a Bitcoin calculation. I was like, "I'm dead broke. I have no Bitcoin. I need to stack." But I understand that was like a bit radical, and obviously a leap of faith, and right place, right time.
Dylan, finally, you're in El Salvador.
Epic. Yeah, happy to be here. This is great.
How long ago did you find out that you were coming?
Like a couple weeks ago, yeah, very just on a whim, Twitter DM. That's the magic of Twitter X. But yeah, happy to be here. It's been an amazing weekend so far, and looking forward to the next few days too.
So this week we had a bunch of Bitcoiners from around the world descend on El Salvador to go to the inauguration of Nayib Bukele, and it's pretty funny because Bitcoiners are not known for dressing up, and events here are very formal. So you had a bunch of people scrambling to find tuxes and suits to rent to go sweat in for the ceremony.
Yeah, it was certainly there was the ceremony at the beginning of the day, starting at 8 a.m., going to 10:11. The later hours were quite hot, and then we had an amazing sort of gala at the presidential palace or presidential house. So yeah, amazing.
You guys went late too, right?
Yeah, pretty late night. Got some Denny's to close it out. So yeah, but was very fortunate for the opportunity. I'm a big fan of everything going on here. It's amazing to see. And then the Bitcoin is obviously kind of my lane, but I think that's just the cherry on top with all of this. The first country to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender could have been any random country, but the story here is just so powerful, and Bitcoin just kind of plays into all of it. And you have leaders all over the world. A lot of U.S. politicians were down here, Tucker Carlson, and who's not a politician, but Donald Trump Jr. and a few senators and congressmen that were all giving Bukele and the El Salvador government a lot of praise for what they've done. And I'm sure you guys cover this all the time, but as an American, it's and some of the cities in the U.S. not being the best in the best situation. It's amazing to see, and hopefully it's a model for what governance can do.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, it's funny seeing all of and there's some pushback sometimes on Twitter about all these Bitcoiners coming down that are usually very anti-government, but being very positive about what's happening in the government here because it is positive.
Yeah.
And so I think for a lot of people that it's a weird position for them to be in. They're not used to being excited and optimistic about what governments are doing.
Yeah, and I mean you can just scroll my Twitter or look up previous things I've said. Like the 2020 election in the U.S., I somewhat cringe, but I wore a shirt and it was like conservative, progressive, libertarian crossed out. And it was like Bitcoiner, and I in 2020 I kind of considered myself a libertarian, anarcho-capitalist sort of person. And not that my views have done a 180 or changed, but I don't think you can just the leave me alone stance of, hey, just like give me my space when things are devolving rapidly and crime is rampant, or never mind all that, but one side of the political spectrum is playing a radical game. The leave me alone stance of just like I'm a libertarian,
Yeah.
and it's somewhat illogical. So I'm no like champion of large government, but there's certainly a case to be made for enforcing laws.
Yeah,
and
basic laws
yeah.
protecting human life. I mean, we saw there, previously there was kind of a power vacuum especially on the community level, and so the gangs were able to really be the ruling government to some extent, and obviously in a way that was very detrimental to the lives of the people. And so there's our ideals, and there's being pragmatic to the realities of living in a fallen world where people are gonna kill and steal from each other. And so how do we police that? And so
Yeah.
that's we've seen in El Salvador, as the government has come out strong and has made mass arrests, that it has brought prosperity and a sense of freedom to those remaining. And that doesn't mean that we ignore those that are potentially falsely arrested. And that's one of those things you have to wrestle through, and it can be messy. But the reality is, lives of the people here have been transformed for the better.
Yeah. And I mean, you would think something as simple as, and obviously there's maybe some edge cases of people in question or whatnot, but in the U.S., you would think it's as simple as, if you commit a crime, rape, assault, murder, theft, larceny, whatever it may be, you go to prison. No, that's not how it works,
Not these
especially
days.
in a lot of jurisdictions. So, unbelievably so, right? A lot of no bail release back into the streets, and that's somewhat emboldening to criminals. And so, yeah, I think it's what's happening here in the best way is an ideological threat to this kind of neoliberalism in the West. So I've been a follower of what's happening here, and saying, well, this has to be something that's watched, and evidently the world is watching. And Bitcoin obviously plays into that story, and it's cool to see.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun to see the eyes of the world, and all these leaders. The King of Spain was here, and like you were saying, a number of politicians and leaders from the U.S. all coming down. We were trying to get Malay. We were trying to get Tucker Carlson to come down here, but no luck so far. We got to get him down to Bitcoin Beach. So if anybody out there knows Tucker Carlson, tell him he needs to come down and sit down with us. I know a lot of people in the Bitcoin space know you from your work at Bitcoin Magazine, also the writings that you put out, your stuff on Twitter, but maybe give people a kind of a brief history of how you came into the Bitcoin space, and then we'll focus more on what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, I found Bitcoin just through curiosity and through my learning of finance and economics. It was just something I didn't immediately dismiss. Who knows? I might have, if I already had kind of 10 years of a Keynesian sort of background or indoctrination. But it was like value investing for me was the thing that I literally just looked at Best Investor in the World when I was in high school, read all of Warren Buffett's philosophies and value investing and the Intelligent Investor type of books, and found Bitcoin as something interesting. I didn't immediately become obsessed with it. But I dabbled.
It's sorry to cut you off, but it's just something striking to me. It's funny. There are a lot of people in the Bitcoin space that were kind of brought into it by Warren Buffett, which we all know, hates Bitcoin. So it's kind of ironic how that value investing and he understood that, but he somehow misses Bitcoin and doesn't understand the value there.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I get it, especially at that age. And not that I was some tenured value investor. I was just reading about the stuff in theory, but kind of made my way more towards like macroeconomics and Ray Dalio's frameworks on debt cycles, and just, I guess, macroeconomics in general. And Bitcoin was just kind of this thing out there in 2019, 2020. And COVID hadn't yet happened. It wasn't viewed as like a pillar in the macro world quite yet. But I bought some and was convicted about it, but didn't really understand it. And had a lot of free time in school. School was quite easy for me, and I wasn't the best student in terms of organization or homework, but the grades were okay. COVID happened. We sent everybody home, sent everybody online. And it was, at the same time I read Jeff Booth's book on the price of tomorrow. And the thesis is basically that the internet and information is dematerializing traditional, legacy education, but not just education, kind of a lot of the day-to-day jobs in life. And AI is a really powerful force. and you have these two opposing forces of technology making everything more abundant, information more abundant, more cheap, more free, more accessible than ever, and this monetary system which requires everything to become more expensive forever. And so this and it's a Bitcoin book that doesn't mention Bitcoin until the last 2 pages. But it was like a wow moment for me when I was attending Zoom classes with a tenured 30-year professor that was could figure out the Zoom call and was referring to this 20-year-old textbook on economic theory that I wasn't really paying attention to while I was on Google or YouTube or podcasts looking up everything that I wanted to know, finding it for free. So I decided to leave school. It really was a Bitcoin decision for me. I became extremely convicted in Bitcoin. It kind of clicked for me in that spring time frame that there is no alternative to this massive debt bubble that we're in. The Fed had, just was turning on the money printer for trillions at a time. And I was deeply convicted and was dead broke. And so, I did maybe something irrational and left school, picked up a manual labor job, got access to as much credit as I could, and put all of my 100% of my income into Bitcoin for the next 12 months, doing a manual labor job while I listened to 10 hours of Bitcoin finance podcasts a day.
So were you like putting all your expenses on credit cards?
Yeah, I maxed 3 credit cards. Obviously
not financial advice.
Yeah, no, I say that it's not something that should be repeated or whatnot, but that was the state of things.
Yeah.
I was 18, 19 years old. And so, I was posting a lot on Twitter, just not for impressions or engagement. I had 100 followers. I was just as a journal, really, daily. I was posting about Bitcoin every day on my free time, reading, learning nonstop. Attended BitBlock Boom in Dallas in August and made some friends. There's like 300 people, like all hardcore kind of Bitcoin maximalists. There was like, there was like side shows where they were 3D printing guns, and it was just, kind of rah liberty bastion of a corner of the U.S. while everybody else was masked up and locked away. So that was pretty invigorating, and met some cool people. And a few months later, got a DM from CK Christian Corollis at Bitcoin Magazine. Like, what are you doing? What's going on? And I said, not much, and it turned into a part-time job, which turned into a full-time job. And the last few years have been kind of doing stuff with Bitcoin Magazine. So analysis and media, and it's been a whirlwind. But the basic thesis is orange coin good.
Yes. Before we dive into that, I want to go back and talk about your decision to leave school, because that's something that I've seen within the Bitcoin space. There's really kind of a negative attitude towards higher education and people going to university, and most Bitcoiners feel that it's a waste of money. I like to push back on that a little bit, and partially that's just my own personal experience. For me, university was very formative. I have still some of my best friends, to this day, are relationships that I made while in university. Met my wife, which that alone was worth it. But it was something I wouldn't trade for anything. But it wasn't. I didn't need it in the. I went into the food service business and had a fairly large food service company that most people in that industry didn't have college degrees, and it helped me in that. But you definitely didn't need it. So for me, I've never seen going to college as a ticket to a job, but as a time in your life that can really help form who you will become. But what I've seen kind of from the outside of your trajectory, you've kind of been able to hack that experience by plugging into the Bitcoin community and the great conversations that happen, that are not just about Bitcoin, but get into broader economics and politics and theology. And there's this community that loves to talk about ideas. So it almost seems like you've been able to get some of the best things of a university education, but not have to put in the years or rack up the student loans. And so, and obviously not everybody, even in the Bitcoin space, is going to have the opportunities you've had and to be able to plug in like that. But just curious as to your take on how that's been versus what you've seen from your friends that continued in university.
Yeah, no, and a lot of people like similar spots as me or my age or younger than me will come up and ask about my experience, and I by no means am saying drop out and search for a Bitcoin job and post on Twitter. Like that's not that's not what I recommend. I definitely stumbled right place, right time. Better to be lucky than good in a lot of instances and aspects. Um, College is very valuable in many aspects, especially that network, that social network, and the friends you make for life, and finding your wife.
Yeah, and I think too it depends on the school. I think the school I went to was a smaller one.
Yeah,
It really delved into issues. It was not woke, and so I
yeah,
feel like for me, I could see what I've seen at some of the other bigger universities out there. People seeing it as a waste.
yeah, and I mean it matters what you're going for, I think too, and also your where you are, where your parents are in life, what opportunities you have and at present. For someone that goes to school that isn't racking up six figures in debt, that is going for engineering or going for something that's very, very applicable, college is a no-brainer still, even if you could learn calculus and engineering concepts on your computer, you like a degree is very fundamental in all of this, never mind the social and the network aspects of it, and the credentials still do matter. I think unfortunately a lot of my generation, Gen Z, even millennials, and the generation that's coming after me, after Gen Z, Gen Alpha, I think. College, especially, if you're just looking at like the cost relative to like median
Yeah.
income or first year graduate income, that discrepancy is massive, and especially if you're going, for like social studies or
Yeah,
gender, like
just if you're looking at purely financial on
yeah,
what more wages you earn, a lot of times it doesn't make sense.
I mean, it's a tough cost,
Yeah.
right? And for debt that you can't default upon. But no, like I left school, but I stayed in my college town and was social with all of my college friends for basically the entire tenure that I would have been at school, right? So I
It's
didn't
kind
get
of
the
like
college.
it's kind of like going to Miami or Nashville for the Bitcoin conference and not buying your ticket, but still
Yeah,
taking
yeah.
advantage of all the social activities
Yeah,
there.
the satellite events. That's what I did. So I didn't attend college, but I got the college experience, and I'm still close
Yeah.
with all my friends, and so
Well, and all these unique experiences you've had in the Bitcoin space. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
somebody your age to be interacting with the folks that you are and to open up to these opportunities, that's been, obviously for you, it was the no-brainer choice to make. Well, maybe not at the time, but it's turned out definitely like it was the right choice.
Yeah, it was a leap of faith for sure, but I think it's a fine line, and yeah, everyone has to kind of weigh the costs and the benefits. But yeah, I think people at least should be a bit more meticulous with the decisions they make, because I think there's a lot of everybody, there's a social expectation that this is the only route,
Yeah.
which oftentimes it is the preferred route, or it is the main the kind of the mainstream route to take right after high school, right? Everyone's wearing their college university shirts one day, and there's this, like, very much social pressure, um, and so it makes sense, but going there with no pass, switching your majors six times, leaving in your third year, and still having six figures of debt without a real path. That's like a tough spot, and there's a remarkable amount of people in that spot, and it's not their. I mean, somewhat is their fault, but it's not like that they're dumb or they're a
Yeah.
bad person. It's very, very, very common. I think it's just something where I, especially when the Bitcoin story clicked for me. Never mind working in Bitcoin, because I didn't have a path to a Bitcoin job or per se. It was more that like I literally was lacing up my Timberlands, and I would go and I would around all my former college friends, and they'd say, "Man, what happened? How I thought you were in the business this school," and I was like, "I was, but now I'm doing electrical work for $16 an hour." They were like, "What? What are you doing?" And for me, it was a Bitcoin calculation.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
"I'm dead broke. I have no Bitcoin. I need to stack." But I understand that was like a bit radical, and obviously a leap of faith, and right place, right time. So yeah, I mean I agree with you. I don't dismiss the value of all of that. I think just more there should be more of a kind of a conscious
Yeah.
decision on the trade offs.
Yeah, no, and you've like I said, you've got kind of the best of both worlds. So tell us about your time with Bitcoin Magazine and what kind of roles you've played there and what most excites you.
Yeah, so I mean, I started off. I was the man in the middle between the op-eds produced. So a lot of Bitcoin Magazine's content is, we kind of want to be this medium for Bitcoiners globally to write about anything. It can be the political aspects of Bitcoin, the technical aspects, Bitcoin and finance, econ, really anything. It can even be a critical, deeply critical, or being bearish on Bitcoin, and we'll publish it, right?
Yeah.
And we have an editorial process. So my job to start was going around and seeing people who had interesting thoughts on Twitter or whatever the medium, and saying, "Hey, do you want to publish with us?" And people like it because we have obviously a big platform, and we can get it out. And some of our stuff is republished on Nasdaq, and I think we used to be. I'm not sure anymore. We're on the Cash App sort of feed, so it's always cool. You get to publish. It's like, so I was the guy, the man in the middle, that was kind of getting
Yeah.
those people. And around the summer of 21, I started writing more analysis. I wrote some of my free time, some op-eds myself that did well. It was like Ray Dalio's debt cycle framework, but with Bitcoin kind of plugged into it, into the thesis. And so I started writing. We started Bitcoin Magazine Pro, which was originally named The Deep Dive, which was myself, and eventually we brought on another person, Sam Rule, to write basically, 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a week research, kind of with an analytical framework to the Bitcoin market. So I mean, I'm a humble stat sacker, DCA sort of guy myself, but it's we have this system that's 100% transparent. The markets around it are uniquely transparent compared to the rest of traditional finance. So whether it's the derivatives or the trading volumes or whatever it might be, it's radically transparent. So we have all this nascent data. It's still very much niche, especially in 21 when we started. And so we were kind of, we started up a Bitcoin research shop, not crypto, Bitcoin, right? And we would write about the crypto stuff when it affected the Bitcoin market. So Luna implodes in 2022, and we'll write about it. But yeah, Bitcoin, and then we'd take a macro spin as well. So because obviously that affects the Bitcoin market. So wrote about I think 200 pieces of content over the span of 2 years or so, 18, 24 months. So that was really, really fun. Did get a bit not burned out, but it's tough to write Orange Coin good 10,000 different ways.
Well, you probably wrote a lot more papers than if you would have stayed in school.
Yeah. So we did that on Substack and the Bitcoin Magazine platform, and that was good. But yeah, and then it was I was a bit just wanted to change a pace from the writing. I was never naturally a writer. I hated writing. It's funny. In high school, I told my parents, and when I was thinking about a career, I was like, well, of the classes I take, I hate writing and I hate public speaking, so I'm never going to do that. I'm a math guy. So I think I'm going to go do something in business or Wall Street or something. And, I ended up in 22, I was like writing 3 times a week and then doing all these podcasts and shows and live appearances. So that was a twist I didn't foresee. But yeah, and then, started to dive a bit more into the analytics and looking at the stuff that I was writing publicly, and trying to apply that to markets more, and learning a bit of Python with the help of ChatGPT and some of that stuff. So joined the UTXO management, and was just applying some of the stuff I wrote about for a few years to what they were looking at in the markets.
So Mike Germano was with us a couple months ago, and he told me you were the brainchild behind going all in on ordinals and pushing that.
Yeah, no, it wasn't my decision. It's been a unique, last 12, 18 months with all of that. Just the culture battle.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin Magazine has taken more of an open stance to it. I mean, look, I've never made my stance like staunchly pro or staunchly anti ordinals. Like my framework has generally been, this is permissionless FU money. We have a system, we have a framework of rules. If you abide by those rules, then you're free to use the market. In 2022, when the mempool was a ghost town and empty, and all of the crypto and Ethereum people were saying, oh, the security budget and Bitcoin's unsafe and it needs tail emissions and you need to make it more than 21 million to pay the miners. And I was like, I have zero worry about the fee market.
Yeah.
We don't need to change Bitcoin. This will self-correct. There's I think a near infinite demand for Bitcoin block space, and this lull in demand is very much transitory. So the fact that this like massive, volatile spikes in fee market demand have come from speculative crypto applications and, trading and token speculation or JPEGs, like didn't really break any of my mental models. I sort of thought, and there was a common narrative that like crypto, Ethereum, this is all a test net and it's all going to be plugged into Bitcoin. And that was like something that I kind of thought was going to happen. I'm not in the weeds and GitHub repos coding up, plugging this data into the witness discount. That's not what I'm doing. But when it happened and, as it developed in 2023, it was, never something that like you saw a lot of people have their mental models somewhat broken. And I'm very sympathetic. I went on Peter McCormick's podcast and was like, look, I'm sympathetic to people in the developing world, people in El Salvador that are, need to open up Lightning channels or send on-chain Bitcoin payments and like having, $20 fees on a random Tuesday. Like I understand that's not great. Right. But if you do believe this is like an anti-fragile system, if you do believe it's a permissionless network, right, like this will be solved. This is, compared to like a zero fee, zero sat per byte environment, this actually places an economic incentive on scaling solutions, right? So look, like there's obviously pros and cons, but it didn't really change how I feel about anything. And, some people are super enthusiastic about it. Others hate it. And I can very much put myself in like, or at least put myself in those shoes for both camps.
Yeah.
But I don't feel, too strongly either way.
Yeah. No, obviously I was joking. Mike never said that, but I was giving him a hard time. I know that was a point of contention, and there was definitely some blowback, on whether it was appropriate for Bitcoin Magazine to be supporting that.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, look, there's certain people in the editorial team or throughout the org that feel more strongly about it than others, and like personal criticism or feedback or whatever's fine, right? Whether it's the executives or editors or whoever, right? Like okay, even if you want to say stuff about myself and my position or my not position, like okay, that's fine. But when something like for certain periods of time is like 50% of the transactions in a block, right? And maybe it's not 50% of the fees or 50% of the block weight, but just in absolute terms, 50% of the transactions are this certain type of speculation, right? Like we're a Bitcoin only media company, Bitcoin only, group of firms. To just pretend that it doesn't exist or to outright deny its existence is a bit, it's like, all right, well, at a certain point, like we have to acknowledge this, right? And so, our editorial team will put out a technical explanation of it, saying something, and then the response is, "Oh, shitcoin magazine," and it's like, okay, well, I mean, and so it's like, okay, well, great, like, what's the solution? How are we gonna stop it? And then it's like, well, we're gonna, are we gonna fork Bitcoin? Like, are you gonna just, we're gonna run our own node implementation? And my response is amazing, run your own node implementation, Bitcoin knots, or you have your own fork, great, but it follows consensus rules, so they're now relaying around you, and you're still stopping nothing, and you're just shouting into the wind. Because like I did a technical deep dive. I was like, all right, like let's examine this. Can we stop this? Can we nip it in the bud? And it was clear that this was not like, if you want to remove all this, the ability to implement or put arbitrary data in Bitcoin, then you have to basically remove every functionable, usable aspect of Bitcoin and the Bitcoin protocol and system to stop it. So, you can just take the nuts and bolts out of Bitcoin until you have nothing left that's useful, and you can still put arbitrary data in, a pub key, right? So it's like, all right, well, so it looks like we're here with this, we're stuck with this thing. How robust is the demand for this speculation and collectibles and trading and alt tokens and the most inefficient sort of alt token experience you can imagine, right? Like if you want a casino, Solana has a better casino than, waiting 30 minutes on a, slow block time for settlement, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, and I think I'm very aware of that. And I think most everyone is too. So yeah, like, look, I'm sympathetic to everyone's views on it. But if this whole thing, if we're like, replying to governments and Twitter and shit posting and saying, you can't stop this, F you. And then, like having a temper tantrum about someone sending an unstoppable transaction, that's paying the miners a higher fee than anyone else. I don't know, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm definitely openly not a fan of ordinals, but I do think that obviously it's appropriate subject for Bitcoin Magazine to cover. And one thing I will say about Bitcoin Magazine, whether it's us talking offline before this or my interactions with other people that were at Bitcoin Magazine, and or even those who have left, they all love working there. They all say it's the best working environment. The team there, even though people don't agree on everything, it's like people are there for the mission. It's not about making money. It's about Bitcoin. And so I really appreciate that about Bitcoin Magazine. And, I know it's hard to be kind of seen as the spokes piece a lot of times because you're under a lot more scrutiny. But I think obviously the industry is much better off having Bitcoin Magazine and the conference and everything than if it didn't exist. So I'm very appreciative.
Yeah, I mean, the magnifying glass and the scrutiny is deserved, and we want that. We want a critical eye on everything we do. But yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing place to work. I I joined the company as a 19-year-old that had never had a corporate experience before, so I have a lot of people come in and tell me like, "Man,
You're kind of hosed now because if you go anywhere
yeah,
else, you're
I
gonna
know."
be.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's great, right? There's no in the org, whether it's the ordinal stuff or whatever it may be. Everybody, like most everyone at the company, is hired. Like I was hired, and they asked me what I was good at, and I was like, my literal answer, which was like a horrible response, was, "I don't know, man. I just love Bitcoin." And CK, who's now at the Human Rights Foundation, running their freedom team, or I forget exactly what it's called, but their Bitcoin team, was basically like, "All right, man, you're hired," And so the process is a bit more rigorous now. I joined with like 11 or 12 people full time. We've 5x, 6x from there, but yeah, it's like everybody on the team from all walks of life, from C-suite all the way down, is a hardcore, diehard Bitcoiner. So the ethos is very much different than probably a lot of corporate environments. And we're not aligned on everything. That's for sure. Like for instance, the ordinals thing. Half the team loves it, half the team hates it, and we can voice those opinions. There's not one person or executive or boss that's saying this is our stance, and you must project that outwards. No, nothing like that. So yeah, I mean, I've been definitely very, very lucky to be at such an awesome company. That's completely aligned with like my view of the world, right? Like the company website b.tc, it's like the goal is hyper Bitcoinization, and so every vertical is about advancing Bitcoin and proliferating it around the world.
So I know you recently had a new opportunity pop up in Japan of all places.
Yep.
As we were talking earlier, I'm just super fascinated. That one, I don't know. I wouldn't expect that to come from a company in Japan for some reason. Maybe that's just my own misconceptions about Japanese culture, but I think it's very interesting that opportunity's popped up. So explain what you are doing now and what that role looks like.
Yeah. So, I mean, personally, I was maybe naively so under the impression and publicly stating for a long, the past 2-3 years, MicroStrategy, that model, it's worked. The market, proved it wrong. I guess in 2022, they round tripped and were underwater for a couple of billion for a bit temporarily.
I think the stock was still up though, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Well, it started at like 120, and I think it was at 150. So it was down like 80% or so. But after even at like 30,000, it was like, well, they've tripled their market cap. Now they've gone from like $1.5 billion company to a $25 billion company.
Really? I didn't realize it was that
significant. And the stock is like, from 120 to 1,600 or something. So, the market cap's increased more than the share price because of the dilution. But it's like, it was so clear to me that like, wow, this is a total cheat code. this is a crack in the matrix in public markets. People have to be paying attention. This is going to be replicated. And to my shock, like it didn't happen. And so, I was talking with some of the guys at UTXO, David Bailey and Tyler Evans, and we were like, well, we should try to do this ourselves and make this happen. And nothing came up in the U.S. And they got a call, a friend of a friend about an opportunity in Japan, and they graciously looped me in. And UTXO made an investment, but this company is MetaPlanet. It's a smaller company. Was formerly had 30 hotels across Tokyo, Japan, and Thailand. More kind of budget hotels that was hit really hard in COVID. So they sold 29 out of the 30 hotels, cleared off all of the debt. Because commercial real estate, you to juice it up, you got to get leverage. And was basically after they cleaned off all the debt, was looking for a pivot. And so the CEO was kind of in the crypto world behind the scenes, for just as he's a former Simon Garovich CEO, a former ex Goldman Sachs derivatives trader, equity derivatives. Bitcoin, crypto, loves the volatility. And so we talked with him. I talked with him for 50 hours, and I was like, and the wheels were already turning here, but was like, this is the strategy, and this is, especially in Japan, right? Highest debt to GDP in the world, low interest rates, the yen's at 35-year lows against the dollar. This is a no-brainer. And so I joined as the director of Bitcoin strategy. I'm still with Bitcoin Magazine,
which I assume is a new position there. At the
new job title. I don't think there's anything else like that on LinkedIn. So that's interesting. But yeah, it was gracious enough. Bitcoin Magazine and UTXO. They said this is all very much aligned with how we view things, and so we're going to, you can still stay, and we can, kind of stay in your Swiss Army knife role. But yeah, join MetaPlanet, and the goal is, to run the playbook, run the corporate Bitcoin playbook. So they have a hotel. It spits off, some profit, but the real strategy is there's no Bitcoin vehicles in the Japanese equity markets. So there's no ETFs, there's no Bitcoin miners, there's no Coinbase MicroStrategies, there's no Bitcoin proxies. Secondly, in Japan, the crypto tax, the Bitcoin tax, is 55% for individuals. So it's ordinary income, up to 55%. So for the highest bracket.
Yeah.
And for listed securities, it's 20%. And a lot of individuals have a tax advantage account called ONISA, which is even lower. I think it's close to zero. And don't quote me on this. Not financial advice or legal or tax advice, but and so the implementation, the strategy, and everything aligned, and it was like, well, this is really much a no-brainer. So came in and we crafted a kind of a white paper manifesto about the macro situation, about our views on Bitcoin. So this is not a crypto digital asset strategy. This is a Bitcoin strategy. Simon Garovich, very much orange-pilled, gets that there is no other game in town. Got the board up to speed. Actually, coming in a few weeks, Tyler Evans, Mark Yusko, and a few other Bitcoin people are joining the board. And we have, about 70% of the shares outstanding, 70 to 80% are totally on board with this strategy. The strategy is to use public capital markets to acquire more Bitcoin. So
is it a publicly traded company right now?
Public company.
Okay.
It's listed
on
in
the
Japan.
Nikkei or
on the Tokyo Stock Exchange.
Isn't that the Nikkei?
TSE.
TSE. Okay.
So yeah, ticker 3350. It's publicly listed. Started out this when the strategy was announced, the company was around $20 million. It briefly, temporarily, last 2 weeks ago, cracked 100 million, and is back to around 50 to 60 at this point. It was for 3 days. It was somewhat crazy. It was the best performing stock in Japan in a row. It was limit up plus 50% on an afternoon session.
And that was just after you guys made the announcement?
Yeah, it was like a week ago. And we announced it early April. I was talking with them and officially joined in early May.
Okay.
And so, yeah, we put out this manifesto in English and Japanese, pushed it through the official Tokyo Stock Exchange disclosure system. And the idea is to, use everything that MicroStrategy has done and more potentially in the public markets. So we have the ability to raise capital with equity raise or debt. or a blend of both in somewhat of a convertible note. And then, the yen's obviously uniquely weak, and the ability to, access, the 10-year debt in Japan is 1%. So, you know, our stated goal as our, corporate disclosures, and everything I've said here is we've publicly disclosed, in a month or towards the end of June. So I guess it's June now. We have a shareholder meeting, where we're asking the board, to authorize to triple or quadruple the shares outstanding. So a 300% increase in the shares outstanding, or I'm sorry, the shares authorized, right? So the ability to issue new stock into the market, or the ability to raise convertible debt, or whatever it may be, do private placement rounds with equity.
So you guys are basically just adapting the yen carry trade to the Bitcoin space
Yeah,
by
so
being able to borrow for next to nothing and put it into a currency that's obviously going to be going up against the yen long term.
that's the idea, and also uniquely, the ability to access equity markets. So, the stock previously had a value of 20 million before the Bitcoin strategy. What we've seen with MicroStrategy is there's somewhat of a premium to its Bitcoin holdings, or people call it its NAV, its net asset value. It's not like Grayscale where it's just Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
It's an operating company, and so we think both internationally and in Japan, the fact that it's unique in being a Bitcoin proxy in Japan. And right now, there's the balance sheet only has 117 Bitcoin. The plan is to dramatically increase that, and we will disclose that when we do. But yeah, I mean, the entire playbook and toolkit is opened up for us. And so the market's responded well to start. It started at, before the announcement, it was 15 yen. It's trading at 55, I think, the last time the market closed. But yeah, we're going to be very aggressive, and the goal is to provide Japanese investors with a vehicle for Bitcoin exposure. And so yeah, really really pumped.
Will you be spending much time in Japan, or how will that work as far as?
Yeah, I mean, so most of the work is asynchronous, obviously. I don't plan to move there full time, but we'll be traveling to Japan with a decent amount of frequency, probably 3-4 times a year, and spending a couple weeks, maybe a month at a time. And so yeah, the team is very nimble. Small, there's 6-7 employees, so almost no expenses, no debt. That we plan to change that. But yeah, the strategy is a Bitcoin strategy, and we're going to be very aggressive. So yeah, it's we've had a lot of very, very interesting conversations the last couple of weeks, and we're feeling very, very confident, very excited.
Awesome. Well, anything else we've missed that's going on that you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, on that. On those lines, I think it's interesting. Semler Scientific in the U.S., a healthcare company that is, has, I think, spits out a decent amount, million, 10 something million a year in profit. Had what is it? I think they had $80 million of cash on their balance sheet. Or 60 million. They just put 40 million of that into Bitcoin. So they have 530 Bitcoin now. They've said that they're adopting Bitcoin as a primary treasury reserve asset. Their stock has seen the 2 days of trading volume to end the week was 17 times higher than the previous year's volume on average for daily trading. And the Bitcoin has not even appreciated. They're actually down in their Bitcoin purchase. The market cap has increased from 160 million to 230 million. So the market is speaking.
Yeah.
And I think this will be somewhat of a meta, and not MetaPlanet, but somewhat of a meta or a trend, this Bitcoin cycle of, okay, the market, we're doing a Bitcoin strategy, stock up 30, I mean, for Semler Scientific, it was up 30% on the day. It was wait, what? And so that challenges, something like that, or, MicroStrategy trading at 25 billion and the Bitcoin being worth 12 or 14 or whatever it may be. These things all challenge the efficient market hypothesis, right? Where when in 23, let's just say for easy math, MicroStrategy is worth 10 billion or 5 billion, right? They're worth 5 billion. Saylor comes out, says, we're going to issue 500 million of stock to buy Bitcoin. So the efficient market hypothesis would say when trading opens at 9:30 in New York, the stock should be down 10%. right? They're diluting by 10%. The stock should be down by 10% or so because they're diluting. That's how it works typically. What would happen is MicroStrategy, they did this like 3 or 4 times, just pure equity dilution, not debt deals, not converts. The stock would open up, let's just say Bitcoin's flat for the sake of this scenario. Yeah. The stock would open up flat or maybe even a tick upwards because everyone that holds MicroStrategy knows it's a Bitcoin play and they want more Bitcoin. And so if it's trading at a little bit of a premium, great. They sell shares, dilute shares outstanding, have more cash, buy more Bitcoin, aggregate treasury increases greatly, and the Bitcoin per share ticks up. And so it flips the entire Wall Street narrative, or not even narrative, like game, this like corporate governance meta of, for 20 years, it's been aggressively borrow as much as you can, buy back your stock, completely deplete your treasury, you lever up the company. It's not you don't care because you're the CFO or the CEO, and all you have are stock options for the next 4 years anyway, and then you're out. You don't care. And like for instance, IBM's market cap is less than the last 20 years of buybacks they've done. So they've levered up IBM, left it a corpse of a business, decapitalized the company, bought back the stock, all enriched themselves. They get out. They don't care. And now it's, IBM's trading for less than the cash they burned just buying their own shares, right? So that's terrible shareholder value for the long term, corporate governance. So the idea that you can be dilutive to your shareholders
for their benefit,
but it's in an accretive fashion, is this thing that no one has caught on to yet. And it's still, I guess it's in its implementation or its testing phase, right? It's not that, this is a story that's been proven. It's still like we've had one case study, MicroStrategy. Now there's, and MetaPlanet's not the biggest company in the world, but 2, or maybe let's call Semler Scientific 2, not to toot our own horn or whatever. I think that we get, this cycle, we get 10, 50, maybe, I think this is something where we see $100 billion in corporate treasuries, instead of just one company having 10, with MicroStrategy. So yeah, I think this is, a world where Wall Street's, access to low cost of capital, and also look at the multiples that exist in the world, right? So, MicroStrategy had somewhat of a business that wasn't, the software intelligence business wasn't growing. It's still spitting out 10, 20 million a year, but was a bit stagnant in terms of its growth. MetaPlanet obviously had a pretty large real estate business, completely degrossed and consolidated all its balance sheet, and now just has one property looking for a pivot. Semler Scientific has a good, actually growing healthcare business, but had a bunch of cash, right? But if you think about all these tech companies, they make, for every $1 they make, they're worth 30, right? Like you're trading at 30x multiples. So these valuations are all, absolutely goosed.
Yeah.
And it's because the cost of capital in real terms is 0 or negative even, right? And maybe the short term it's 5% and inflation's lower. But for all the debt we have out there, we need financial repression. We need interest rates below the level of inflation for a decade to get out of this. And so Wall Street knows that. The equity valuations know that. And so this Bitcoin strategy, again, not a few, if the aggregate value of these companies running these strategies is 20 billion, or, take out MicroStrategy is, a couple $100 million, big whoop. But we this becomes a trend.
It's the playbook for everybody to follow.
This is the Trojan horse into, getting Bitcoin to, some of these kind of crazy price targets that a lot of us talk about. This is one of the angles, right? The ETF is a big success, right? All the individual stackers and hodlers out there, the developing world, people in El Salvador that are making an earnest living, that are just saving wealth. Like this is all applicable. But one of the 1,000-pound gorillas in the room is the corporate entities that have trillions and trillions of dollars of wealth in their balance sheet, and also access to this cheap cost of capital, and these outlandish valuations in terms of their market cap. So I think this is an unexplored and very nascent narrative, and not only narrative, but just reality. And excited to play a small part in a little corner of the world in Japan. But yeah, I think I'm pretty excited
I
about
mean,
it.
what an amazing opportunity, especially at your age, to be helping them lead that strategy going forward.
Yeah,
That's
it's
that's
and Japan is
crazy.
interesting because Mount Gox happened there. Um, Obviously, the yen is very weak, but Bitcoin is kind of just viewed as another casino chip. And our messaging is very clear, and we're still working at kind of getting more in touch with. We're obviously traded in Japan, but we're still working on getting in touch with the community there, and the messaging there. Right, I don't speak Japanese. I wish I did, but even then, if I did, I'm not a local there. I'm not native. We want to be on the front of the messaging, the signaling here. That look, this isn't it's not like necessarily their fault, or like the end of the world that the debt situation is what it is. We're not pointing any fingers, but this is a reality, and Bitcoin is this still pretty nascent despite being $1 trillion engineering solution to this big massive problem. And so doing it through a corporate entity, it obviously doesn't present the sovereignty that Bitcoin in a cold storage solution does. But if we can give not only equity investors but also debt investors Bitcoin exposure, and when I say debt investors, this is the one thing I don't think anyone understands. MicroStrategy through these convertible notes, right? Like in a rising rate environment, the 10-year yield went from 1% to 5% from 2021 to today, or 4.5%. MicroStrategy's zero interest rate convertible debt from 2021 to today is up more than 200% from par. So it was issued at a dollar or $100 on the $100 par value. It's now at 300 plus. The convertible, that does not happen in the bond market. That never happens. It's the best performing debt instrument in the world from par. The convertible, zero interest rate convertible note. Why? Because it's
Bitcoin.
It's a Bitcoin proxy. So the stock, is a big story. Their Bitcoin holdings are a big story. They have 1% of the Bitcoin supply, which is massive. But the convertible note, taking your balance sheet, Bitcoinizing the balance sheet, not only Bitcoinizing, because Bitcoin's notoriously volatile, right? But also adding a sprinkle of liabilities to your asset liability balance sheet. So you get levered Bitcoin, right? And then that volatility, that mark-to-market volatility of your shares, of your common stock, of your balance sheet is not a weakness. That's a strength. And people don't understand why that's a strength, right? Like Bitcoin's so volatile. Sailor, you're crazy. MicroStrategy is even more volatile. Sailor, you're a madman. That's the entire reason they can borrow at zero.
Yeah. Because
the bond math of a convertible note, they're not like, the narrative is good that, oh, these bond investors, they love Bitcoin, or, they, like myself or like others, they love listening to Sailor on a podcast, and he's, that's not what it is. Even though that might be a good story to tell. They're just looking at, similar to how options trader would look at if you go on say Robinhood, and you're looking at the value of calls and puts out of the money. The stock's at 10, a call for 15, or a put at 5. The value of that for a stock that doesn't move at all and is just flat and dead, those options are worth nothing. But if you crank the volatility from 20% annualized to 100% annualized for that stock that's trading at $10, the $15 calls and $5 puts are really valuable. So MicroStrategy can borrow at zero because they have a balance sheet that's Bitcoinized, and not only 100% Bitcoinized, 120% Bitcoinized. And so this is the crack in the matrix. And this is how, they're borrowing at 50 basis points with a 10-year at 5%. In theory, if the cost of capital was 1% with a weaker currency, what could you borrow at? So that's what we're going to explore, and we haven't done it yet, but that's what we're excited to do.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, I appreciate you coming in today. I know you've only been here for a short time. We still need to get you out surfing. You haven't had pupusas yet either, so we've got some things to cover with you over the next few days. But where can people find you? I know you have a Substack. I know you're on Twitter. I don't know, is it just under your name, or where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me at Dylan LeClair _. I have an early YouTube that I've I think 7 episodes in that I haven't posted for 10 days or so, but we'll get on that. So we'll be posting that more. Dylan LeClair, you can look me up there too. But yeah, besides that, no, that's what I'm working on, and I appreciate you having me and being a gracious host here. I'm excited for the next few days.
Well, I'm excited to follow what you got going on in there, Japan. I think it's going to be an exciting year coming up here for you. A lot of fireworks.
Yeah, we're very excited.
All right. Well, we'll get you out on the water. We'll make a surfer out of you while you're here.
Love it. Sounds
Thanks,
good.
Dylan.
Thank you.